And we're back examining the United States Constitution line by line. I'm Don Frazier.
I'm Paul Fabrizio.
And we are now into the Bill of Rights,
Yay!
which, of course, are the first 10 amendments to the Constitution.
Plus the 27th.
Plus the 27th. Yeah, that poor orphan hanging out. All right, so everybody's got their favorites. Mine's the 17th. Yours is the 27th.
It has the potential to cut congressional pay, or at least not prevent them from raising it so much.
Don't give away the ending.
Okay.
Make them wait for the 27th.
Okay.
But it was there, and now it's gone, and now it's there.
Yes. Okay.
Right, so, but for the time being, for this particular episode, we are now on amendment number 4. So what's our line?
Ready?
Yes.
The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized.
This one's wide open, especially in the age of the NSA.
Ooh, National Security Agency, the spies.
Yeah, I mean, because how secure are we in our papers and persons and all that now?
We're not secure.
At all. I mean, Target knows what I need to buy long before I need to buy it.
Yes.
And I'll get an email on that. But if Target can do that,
what can the government do?
Correct.
Now, remember, and this is an important time to remember it, what we're talking about only relates to the government.
Correct.
And
not Target.
Not Target. The reality is that each of us, by signing agreements to use our phones, use our credit cards,
accept
whatever,
emails. Yeah.
Accept emails, we are giving away a ton of information about ourselves. We're allowing companies, businesses, to have access to the most private information about us.
Absolutely.
If you've got a phone that has a watch attached to it, some company knows your heart rate.
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
Wait a second.
And recently, some newspapers, I believe the Washington Post in particular, has just been keeping track of what happens to your phone at night while you're sleeping. And the activity that takes place, and because of the cookies that are attached or the agreements that you assigned, how much information you are sending off every night to a myriad of companies.
Wow.
And we give that right away by saying, yeah, I agree to this user agreement, which most of us don't read.
Correct. But the federal government could then tap those networks.
They could.
And then kind of by double jumping, get a vast amount of data on a lot of people that never, agreed to give it to the government, but agreed to give it to Target.
Right.
And then the government got it from Target.
Right. And this has actually happened in regarding cold cases.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah.
Solving murders. And it's not the federal government. It's state governments. It's localities that are using people's DNA to
databases.
solve 30-year-old crimes.
Have you ever done one of those?
I have.
Yeah, so
Yes.
it's out there in the wind somewhere.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and I don't know if the company I gave it to has given away the rights to that to other people. I just don't know. And to be honest, I really don't care, and that's a stupid thing to say because I should be protective of my privacy. So,
all right, so what about
I'm a flawed human being.
Human being. Well, at least you have DNA. We've proven that. You don't have green blood like I suspected.
Okay.
All right, so what about the rest of that amendment? Because it seems to be a bunch.
Okay, there's really two parts to it. One is that we have the right for our people, for our persons, our homes, our papers and effects, to be secure from unreasonable searches and seizures.
What's unreasonable?
Oh, boy.
So is the NSA listening to my phone conversation? Is that unreasonable?
Okay.
Spit it out loud.
Okay. You're asking us a whole bunch of things. Let's take the first one, unreasonable. So therefore, the flip side of that is reasonable, and the generally accepted definition of reasonable is that which a reasonable, ordinary person would find acceptable. So we're not talking extraordinary in any sense of the word.
Sure.
We're talking just an ordinary citizen, what would be in their realm of rationality.
Correct.
And so that would be what's reasonable. So anything that's outside of that is unreasonable.
So could you then infer that since we are so willing to give our personal information to Target,
We're so willing to give it to the government.
that it's unreasonable, that it's reasonable to assume that we should give it to them too?
And in fact, that's not a jump that you can logically make, because there's a difference between a company wanting your money and the government, which can take away your liberty. They can lock you up. They can use what information you have.
They can drop a Hellfire missile on you as you're driving along in your pickup truck in Yemen,
Yes,
as it turns out.
And they did.
And they did.
Yes.
That was
Not reasonable.
not reasonable, and probably not
one
due
sense.
process.
Yeah, probably wasn't. Now, you just brought up a really important word, due process.
Yes.
And we hear about due process all the time. It turns out that due process is a guarantee of procedures
Yes.
that the government has to take if they're going to take away our liberties.
And where does this come from?
Comes from the Fourth Amendment, which we're talking about now,
Yep.
the Fifth Amendment, the Sixth Amendment, and the Eighth Amendment.
Yeah, so we like our methods and procedures
We
in this
do.
nation that's run by rule of law.
Yes, exactly. So whereas a company doesn't give you a guarantee of procedures,
Correct.
we just sign away our rights when we hit check on, do we
Yeah.
accept this user agreement? The government, on the other hand, if they're going to do anything, they have to do all these steps. And as is outlined in this amendment, if they're not going to do those, then they need a warrant. They got to get a warrant. And a warrant has to be specific. And this is
It
one
has
of
to
my...
be a specific location, specific time, specific object that they're investigating.
And the person or things to be seized.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty amazing step that they take.
Now, in context, this is a reaction against people just kicking in the door and rounding up the usual suspects.
Right. And you watch on TV, and sometimes it drives me crazy on TV, to see police just run into somebody's house and do all sorts of things and walk out, and wait a second, where's the search warrant? If you don't have a search warrant, probable cause for what you're doing?
Yeah.
I mean, what rule of law did you go do that allows you to do that? And the answer is there isn't any.
Man,
And-
so that ruins the entire end of Christmas vacation for me. Thanks, Paul.
That's my goal. That's not the one with President Trump in it. No.
No.
That's Home Alone 2.
Yeah.
Okay. Different.
No, this has
Different
got Bill
genre.
Murray's brother in it, Chevy Chase.
He's,
And the kid that grew up to be the guy on Big Bang Theory.
oh, okay. Johnny Galecki.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks for
What
ruining
does
it
this
for-
got to do
I know,
with
you're just ruining
Fourth
my-
Amendment?
Yeah.
Okay.
Ruining my stuff
So-
because they didn't present a warrant. They just came through the windows and
Right.
yeah.
Okay, so let's go back to your original thing, the NSA. Did the NSA have a right to collect our data?
In the
And-
course of just kind of doing a broad sweep
right.
of all data. It
Yeah,
was
what they
Skynet.
did is they just sucked up everything.
Yeah.
And so they had access to it, and they did it without a search warrant. And is that proper?
And unreasonable.
And unreasonable? Is it a violation of the Fourth Amendment?
And is it unreasonable since we're already volunteering to do that in the private sphere? Even though you said that's a
Okay.
leap, I'm not sure it is. I'm
simply-
talking about a logic.
Okay, and I could care less about that logic. I'm
Who cares
sorry.
about logic?
Because there is a distinction, a clear distinction between the government
Sure.
and private business, and I think we have to keep that always in mind.
I understand. I'm just trying to define reasonable or unreasonable.
And you're choosing an avenue to do that, which is really difficult, and that's an area of national security, especially because that action took place in the context of 9/11.
Correct. I mean, it's
and so
looking for terrorists and trying to listen to phone conversations.
Right.
There.
And remember, it was just not 9/11, but it was also the anthrax scare as well. So there was an element of domestic terrorism that was going on too. And so the government took steps that it thought were reasonable. Okay?
Yes.
And that most Americans at that time supported as reasonable. And anytime you're talking about national security, as opposed to ordinary security that we have on the streets of Abilene,
Sure.
there's a whole different mix that goes into these calculations. And in fact, there's actually specific courts that deal with national security in regards to search warrants, that sort of stuff. And they're separate and they operate under different rules that Congress has authorized. So, so my perspective on it is that the government was correct in sweeping up the data. At one time, that situation no longer exists, and in fact, it was
Or does it?
Okay, well, you can go there, Mr. Conspiracy Theorist.
I don't know.
But it was just this week that the government, the NSA, announced that it's no longer going to be storing this data. It's going to be getting rid of it. So, was this ever resolved by the Supreme Court? I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't even think they've unknotted that.
Right. The government, the Supreme Court specifically, really gives, and historically it has, great leeway, great freedom to the government and government activities in regards to national security. I mean, they allowed for the internment of Japanese citizens, Japanese Americans and Japanese who were here during World War II.
Correct.
I mean, that's a pretty severe thing, and Supreme Court allowed it at the time.
Well, I thought it was reasonable given the circumstances.
Yeah, exactly. So,
I'm amazed at how many of my students come in to try to relitigate that. It's pretty awesome.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. And by the way, the Supreme Court finally admitted it made a mistake.
Yeah.
Only about a year ago.
Correct.
So,
Correct.
when this amendment never really thought in terms of that broader question or had any idea of the technology that we're talking about. And the reality
they couldn't have had.
Yeah, and the reality is that you and I today, when we think about this, we're really talking about local police.
Yeah, that's the way you usually think about it.
Yeah,
you got to have a warrant. You can't just kick in my door.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not just that. I mean, when are we most likely to have an issue, even to see a police officer? It would be in traffic.
Yeah, correct.
And so what we're really talking about at a basic, simple level is our behavior with local police, their behavior towards us. Okay? I was recently stopped by a police officer for speeding. Okay?
You blackguard, you scofflaw.
True confessions here. And this was in Oregon. I was there visiting my mother.
Ah, see.
And long stretch of highway. I was going a little fast.
How fast were you going?
I was going 77, according to the police officer, in a 65-mile zone.
Well, that's their fault for not raising the speed limit to a reasonable level.
And if you were there, you would have agreed because it was a straight line for 25 miles and almost no traffic.
Yeah.
2 cars. I only saw 2 cars. I should have seen the third. The third would have been the police officer. Okay, but that's beside the point. But the police officer, when he pulled me over, he was super polite. I was so impressed. It was actually the local sheriff. He introduced himself, and he said, I am going to begin to tape this, and I want you to know that I am beginning the taping of this now. And then he tapped his chest, he tapped the camera, and he began taping it.
His body cam.
His body cam. And he was following procedures.
Did he say, wait, I saw you on that Constitution Line by Line show?
No, he didn't. And it turned out he was training another sheriff's deputy, and I got away with a warning.
I knew it.
And it helped that I had my mother right next to me.
I was about to say, did you cry?
No, I didn't. And my mother said, yeah, he probably just needs to meet his quota.
So cynical.
Yes, exactly. So this is the first thing, and that's the most likely time we would encounter the police, is when we're in traffic.
Yeah.
And it turns out that when we're in traffic, we have the least protection from the Fourth Amendment. And the reason for that is we're on government roads.
Oh, yeah.
Government owns the roads. They give us permission to drive on them. If we're on them, we have to have a license.
Yep, that's true.
So we have to have insurance. So they're already interfering with us. And so therefore we expect the least protection from the government when we're on their roads. Okay? But if you're a pedestrian, you have more protection. Police officer just can't pull you over when you're walking down the street unless the police officer has reasonable cause. Okay? I'm sorry, probable cause,
Yeah.
or reasonable suspicion that something's going on.
Like if you're smoking crack going down the street, that would probably be a tip-off.
Okay, or you match the description of someone that they're looking for
Bank
who just
robber.
robbed a bank. Yeah. So there's a series of things. And you have the greatest protection from the government, from the police, in your own home.
Sure.
And
Kind
so
of a castle doctrine-esque.
yeah, exactly. And that goes back to how far in history?
Way, way, way back.
Yeah. So it really depends on the Fourth Amendment, where you are and what you're doing. And so, when you're on the road, the government can pull you over for the slightest violation of the law. You're going 1 mile over, 1 mile under, the government can pull you over because you've broken the law. If your taillight doesn't work, equipment failure.
Or if he breaks your tail out as he's coming up to check you.
You're just being cynical there. I'll give the police credit. They're going to pull me over for reasons that make sense. I mean, I was pulled over once for not having my headlights on. Okay? And it was 10 o'clock at night, and I should have had my headlights. I was tired. I'm sorry. So the government has reasons to pull you over. Can they stop you as part of a random search? They're pulling over every 10th car.
Yeah.
Yes, they can.
Yeah, I've faced that before.
Yeah. I was once stopped in an insurance stop where they were stopping every single car to make sure that they had insurance.
Oh, wow.
Totally constitutional.
Where was this?
This was in Georgia.
Yeah.
And they had this law, and they wanted to make sure it's enforced. You're at a nightclub, you're at a bar, and they're doing a random search, of everybody who's coming out of that. Are they allowed to do that? Sure, they can do that. They have rules to enforce. You're on their property by your driving.
But they can't kick in your door.
No,
And just say,
kicking in door, they need a search warrant.
we're going to drag you out because you're guilty.
Yeah. Now, let's say you're at your home, Don, and all of a sudden the police knock at the door, and they say, we understand something's going on here at this house. We'd like to come in your house. Can you say no to them?
Yeah, it says produce the warrant.
Exactly. That's the Fourth Amendment. That's exactly the Fourth Amendment. And if they don't produce the Fourth Amendment, the warrant,
yeah.
they can't come in your house. You have every right to turn them down.
Yeah, turn your body cam on now, brother.
Yeah. And, I don't know what the rules here in Abilene are regarding body cameras, how they do that. But anyway.
No idea.
Yeah, I don't know either. So they have rules they have to follow. Okay? And by the way, if they don't follow those rules and they gather evidence against you in violation of the Fourth Amendment, that evidence they gather could be tossed out. And that's called the exclusionary rule. And it's set up by the Supreme Court. And it says, hey, the fruits of a poisonous tree are not allowed in a trial. Okay?
Now, where does the Miranda law fit into all this?
Miranda law comes in later.
Right.
Different
The
amendment.
right. Okay, good. Yeah, oh, I know which one that is.
Yeah,
Right,
that's a
good.
different amendment. You're trying to trick me, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm just trying to keep you nimble.
Okay.
So are we
And
done with this one?
One other thing,
Except for this?
except for this. Fourth Amendment, the exclusionary rule, sometimes police officers will say, hey, I was acting in good faith. And yeah, I broke the rules, but I was acting in good faith. And so because I was acting in good faith, I'd like the evidence to be included.
I heard a woman screaming in the back.
Yes. Yeah. And by the way, police officers, it's called plain view. Police officer, when they're walking outside your car, can look in the car, plain view. That also includes hearing. They have a dog with them, and the dog marks on you. That's all plain view. They're walking by your house, and they hear a scream.
I got
that allows them
stopped.
to do things.
I got stopped on the way from Austin, around
Okay.
Goldthwaite in Central Texas,
Okay.
and I was driving with my daughter, and my daughter looks very young.
Mm-hmm.
She's 19, but she looks like she's 14 or
Okay.
12. And I'm driving a black SUV, and I got pulled over, and I'm going. I think I was going 3 over the speed limit or something else. Had cruise control on, and he came around to her side of the truck
Okay.
and said, "Hi, how are you? You are," and she goes, "His daughter." And he goes, "And you are," and I gave my name, and he says, "And you're coming from," I said, "Austin, heading to Abilene." He says, "Okay." Says, "I'm just checking." And I guess they were checking for human trafficking, I guess. I have no idea. But that was the oddest stop I've ever had.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. And there wasn't a whole lot of, you were speeding or you weren't speeding or anything else.
No indication that you broke the law.
Yeah, no indication at all that I broke the law. And he came over to the passenger side window.
I question the legality of it.
Well, I wasn't going to make a big deal of it because
Yeah,
I was
of
shooting
course.
and scooting,
Yeah, yeah. I've been stopped strangely a couple times. One was I was driving by a prison in Alabama, and there had been an escape, and I didn't know it.
Ah,
And the police were stopping every car.
yeah.
And they said, "Can we search your car?" I said, "Sure."
Yeah.
And they had me pop the trunk. I gave them, it's called a consent search.
Sure.
And they could search my car for it. So, I mean, that's just the way it goes. Another time, and I'll just say this real quickly, I was in Georgia, and there was a sign on the interstate. I was heading towards Columbus, Georgia from Atlanta, and the sign said, "Drug stop ahead, all vehicles must stop." And immediately cars pulled over the side of the road,
There's stuff flying out the windows.
and they just pulled over the side of the road. They didn't do anything because as long as you don't come to the drug stop,
Yeah.
you haven't broken any rules. Okay? And I just went up right to the drug stop. It was a
Gave them your drugs.
Well, it was a full-scale operation they had. They had mechanics there who were stripping apart cars.
Wow.
They had a jail cell, portable jail cell there.
Wow.
It was amazing. I don't know how big
Who's
it was.
cow on wheels?
Exactly. And when they came to me, they just looked at me and they just waved me through. I don't look like I carry drugs, I guess.
Wow.
But the person in front of me, I remember, was pulled over the side, and they had a drug dog there that was starting to sniff that car. And what cracked me up was all these cars that were parked on the side of the road, they just stayed there. If they decided to go through the drug stop, then they would be searched.
They're
of course.
subject.
Yeah. And of course, if
They're
they
just gonna
turned
wait 'em
around,
out?
if they turned around and went the other way, they'd be driving through the median, violation of the law, which would allow the cops to stop them. And of course, there was police officers there with binoculars
Yeah.
ready to go after them. And this was a big stop. And it turned out someone who got busted at this took the case and got convicted and then appealed it. And the appeal, he won. Or she, I don't know which.
Wow.
And they won because the question before the court was, what does carrying drugs have to do with driving? So what right did the police have
To do a traffic stop.
to do a traffic stop and go after everybody? Now, drinking and driving, that's one thing.
Yeah.
But drugs, possession of drugs, different thing. So apparently it was all for naught.
Wow.
Yeah.
Poor Georgia. They're trying hard. They just can't pull it off.
I was stopped so many times in Georgia. It was just amazing. So nothing against Georgia. I loved it. I had a
like
great
Georgia.
time going
I
to
lived in
college at
Georgia.
Emory University there.
Man, Georgia's good.
So, can I tell you one other story?
By all
Is that
means.
all right?
Yeah,
I mean,
I mean-
because we're talking the Fourth Amendment. So,
Yeah.
so this came from one of my students, and when she was in high school, she was at a high school party. Apparently, there was drinking at this party
At a high school
somebody's
party.
house.
Say it ain't so.
I'm shocked. But anyway, so she was at this high school party. There was drinking involved. And at some point, a police officer showed up at the door. There had been a complaint. And the police officer knocked at the door. And when the door opened, whoever answered the door was sober. And the police officer addressed this person. The police officer said, "I understand there's some drinking here by some minors. And I'd like permission to come in the house and search." And whoever answered the door said, do you have a warrant? And the police officer said, no, I don't have the warrant. And then the person said, well, I'm sorry, you can't come in. Closed the door. Police officer was outside. Everybody went back to the party. All of a sudden, the door flew in. The police officer tumbled in the house, looked around and saw all these kids drinking. Called for backup. 51 kids got busted.
Wow.
Okay? Major coup. Much of the high school.
Yeah. Getting frog marched down to the station.
Yes. So anyway.
It goes to trial.
Goes to trial. Student says during the course of testimony, police officer was denied entry. He should not be allowed in. Anything he found once he was in should be subject to the exclusionary rule. Excluded from the trial. The police officer comes when it's his time for testimony, and he says, he says, I was denied entry to the house. I didn't want to go back in the house. He said, I was very tired. So after they wouldn't let me in. They closed the door. I just leaned on the door. He said, is it my fault that the hinges on the door were so rusty that by my leaning on the door, the hinges would break and I would fall in? I asked for a good faith exemption. Okay?
Oh, wow.
Okay, clever officer, right?
Yeah, very clever officer.
The students and their lawyers then presented as evidence the door.
And the hinges, which were not rusty.
There was the officer's footprint halfway up the door. He had kicked the door in. So no good faith exemption.
Nice.
Sorry, Fourth Amendment applies. Everything was excluded.
Everybody go home, and thank you, Officer Boychuk. But
yeah, you're gone.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's how the Fourth Amendment works.
That's a great example.
I think that explains it really well.
So that's our line.
That's our line. That's our Fourth Amendment.
All right, so we're going to pick up the Fifth Amendment next time. Thanks for watching.